In a case that was compared to the Casey Anthony trial, here's the case of Alice Crimmins. It happened in 1965. This is the home where Alice Crimmins lived with her husband and 2 children. This is the Kew Gardens section of Queens, New York. There's Alice and her husband. Let's work this story backwards. Tell you the details about it and why it was so notorious back then. At around 9 a.m. on July 14th, 1965, Alice Crimmins noticed that her 2 children weren't in their beds. The 26-year-old frantically called her husband, who was living elsewhere since their marriage had fallen apart. He was furious at her apparent neglect and reported the children missing. We're heading here to the Van Wyck Expressway, which plays a part in this story. There was no trace of 5-year-old Eddie Crimmins Jr. or 4-year-old Alice Missy Marie Crimmins anywhere near their Queens, New York home. But the police already had a suspect: their mother. Despite having little evidence, investigators soon decided that Alice Crimmins was their culprit. Within a few hours of police taking Crimmins in, their daughter's strangled corpse was found in a nearby lot. We will take you to where we theorized that lot was. It's empty. Weeks later, the decomposed body of Eddie Jr. was found along the Van Wyck Expressway. So decomposed that the authorities could find no cause of death. Police then grew even more desperate to pin the murders on Alice Crimmins, and they spent years surveying her before they officially did. Here's a undated picture of Eddie Jr., Eddie, and Missy, the children. What followed was a trial of something that was unprecedented controversy, never before. The tabloids painted her as an immoral tramp, which was what the prosecution also said, in lieu of hard evidence. Now, Alice Crimmins was ultimately found guilty of killing her own children, though she insisted their true murder, whoever murdered them, remained at large. Now, Alice Crimmins, going back to Alice Crimmins, she was born March 9th, 1939 in the Bronx. She was raised by devout Irish Catholic parents. She spent her days at St. Raymond's Convent and dreamt of independence by night. At 19, she decided marriage was the only way to attain it. In 1959, she married her high school sweetheart, Edmund Crimmins, and gave birth to her son, Eddie Jr. Alice Marie was born the following year, while the family moved into the Regal Gardens apartments in Kew Gardens, New York. Crimmins, she soon found herself stuck at home, while her husband spent his nights drinking with colleagues. By her own account, She had only slept with one man in her entire life and grew curious about her options as her husband neglected her. Crimmins, she took up work as a cocktail waitress, kind of a taboo move for a mother in mid-century America. She further defied the idea of the nuclear family when she reportedly began dating her customers. Now jilted, Edmund Crimmins eventually moved out, but not before he bugged his wife's bedroom and recorded her affairs with other men. He later had admitted to sneaking in when she was out to touch her personal things and exposed himself to young girls in a nearby park. Let me tell you this again, because this is unbelievable. He later even admitted to sneaking in when she was out to touch her personal things and exposed himself to young girls in a nearby park. Here, this is the Van Wyck Expressway. I'm not exactly sure where they found young Eddie's body, but it was along the Van Wyck. So it could have been anywhere along where you see these houses and the nearby grass. Anywhere along this area. It's a little bit more wooded and trees, but anywhere along this stretch of road. You see the picture coming up. Now, when his son told him that his mother regularly invited, quote, cousins who walked around in undershirts to spend the night, Edmund Crimmins, he became incensed. But he was most enraged when his wife failed to return home one night to the kids after partying with her boyfriend, who was a millionaire contractor at the time. Then, on June 22nd, 1965, Edmund Crimmins filed for sole custody of their children. Alice's own mother sided with him, calling him a good man. He was called a good man who would take good care of the children. The custody hearing was scheduled for the July 19th, 1965. But it would never happen. Now, when she found that her children were missing on the morning of July 14th, Alice Crimmins' first call was to her estranged husband. She reportedly broke down when he told her he didn't have the children. "Don't you play games with me," she said. "Eddie, don't fool around. Do you have them? Please don't do this to me. Eddie, they are missing." What was written when that's a quote. Now, when Detective Peering responded to the Crimmins' call about the missing children that same afternoon, he was met by Edmund and Alice Crimmins. And Alice apparently was noted to have been in high heels and tight pants. Peering proceeded to question the husband and wife, but took no photos of the scene, nor noticed a missing screen in the children's bedroom window. He didn't even dust for fingerprints. Crimmins relayed her evening to the officer. She said that she fed her kids at 7:30 p.m. And here we are on a Van Wyck, heading to the Crimmins' former residence the night before, and woke up to find them gone. But by the time Peering had spotted But by the time Peering spotted empty liquor bottles, birth control pills, in the bedroom, he had already designated Alice Crimmins as his prime suspect. So, birth control pills, empty liquor bottles in the bedroom, that kind of caused the detective already to kind of have a preconceived notion, and he already, suspected Alice as his prime suspect. You take the husband, I take the bitch, he allegedly told his partner, the police officer. Apparently, this is all based on, court reportings and, been on record. Hours later, a colleague had informed the detective that Missy had been found. He drove Alice Crimmins to the empty lot where her daughter's corpse lay buzzing with flies. She fainted immediately. Peering would later claim that Crimmins was unmoved by the sight. When Eddie Jr.'s corpse was discovered weeks later, it had decomposed to the point that the medical examiner couldn't even determine how he died. Despite there being no physical evidence to suggest that Alice Crimmins killed her children, prosecutors tried their best to prove that she was guilty. For 2 years, authorities sidelined suspects, including local burglars and Eddie Crimmins Sr., who admitted that he was obsessively stalking his wife before the tragedy. His alibi also changed several times. His alibi changed throughout the investigation. Nonetheless, the authorities, they had wiretapped Alice's phone, followed her around, and used any instance of her frustration and grief as proof of her guilt. For her part, Alice did her best to kind of incite the cops whenever she saw them following her, and would answer her tap phone. "Hi, boys, drop dead." Her defiance only fueled the case against her. "They wanted me to break down," Crimmins later told Gross in 1971. Quote, "They wanted me to grieve, not for the sake of my children, but for them, the police. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. They were my kids. Nobody was out looking to see who killed my kids. They were interested in making me break." Finally, in November of 1966, the prosecutor's office, they found something to convict her with. An eyewitness account from a neighbor that was supposedly brain damaged. On September 11th of 1967, Alice Crimmins was arrested for the murder of her daughter. The trial of Alice Crimmins began on May 9th of 1968, and it just exclusively concerned the murder of her daughter. But as far as the tabloids were concerned, Crimmins was already guilty. She was the epitome to many, the shift from a woman's place as a mother and wife to one as a free and liberated individual, and those who weren't on board with the shift demonized her. But she was the demon. The majority of the trial against her will be based on faulty eyewitness testimonies and sexist accusations. The prosecutor even asked her about nakedly swimming in her boyfriend's pool months after her children were found deceased. Where were you? Or rather, where were your children when you were swimming without a bathing suit, he asked. They were dead, said Crimmins coldly. The prosecutor then went on to list all of Crimmins' known lovers, including her children's barber, until the judge had to ask him to stop. Crimmins, during this trial, reportedly sobbed when the coroner described the state of her daughter's body. But then one hard fact flew in the face of her testimony and cast some doubt on her innocence. A forensic pathologist had testified that Missy had been strangled to death and that the food in her system could not have been ingested more than 2 hours before her death. This contradicted Alice's original claim that she had last fed her kids at 7:30 p.m. However, a neighbor told authorities that she heard Crimmins tucking her children into bed at 9 p.m. Then one of Crimmins' boyfriend, they gave damaging testimony against her at trial. He claimed that just days before her daughter was killed, she told him that she would rather see the children dead before she let her husband have custody of them. He added that she admitted to him that she killed her daughter. I said Missy and Eddie are dead, the boyfriend testified, and she said, Joseph, please forgive me. I killed her. At this testimony, Crimmins had shouted, I thought you were my friend. How could you? The most incriminating piece of evidence was, of course, the eyewitness account of the neighbor. She claimed to have seen a woman of Crimmins' height walking toward the interstate at 2 a.m. on July 14th, 1965. We are approaching the house again, and we will then take you to where we theorize the body was found of Missy. So the neighbor again, who had reportedly brain damage, she said she's seen Alice, a woman of Alice's height, walking towards the interstate rather. So this will be in the direction straight ahead there. At 2 a.m. on July 14th of 1965, accompanied by a child and a man, and holding a bundle of blankets. You liar, Crimmins reportedly yelled as her neighbor testified against her. Unfortunately, no one mentioned that her neighbor was an unreliable witness who changed her story to prosecutors multiple times before taking the stand. So Alice was ultimately found guilty by her all-male jury on May 27th, 1968. You want to close your books, Crimmins screamed at the judge. You don't give a damn who killed my children. The following December, her 5 to 20-year sentence was overturned when trial-related misconduct came to light. 6 months after that, though, Crimmins was indicted again, this time for the murder and manslaughter of her son. The second trial now began on March 15th of 1971. A second neighbor this time came forward to corroborate the claims of the first neighbor. Miraculously, a man named Marvin Weinstein came forward to testify that it was he, his wife, and their dog who were mistaken for Crimmins that night. Nonetheless, the jury found Alice Crimmins guilty again, and this time the judge, George Balbach, sentenced her to life in prison for murder and a concurrent 5 to 20 years for manslaughter in May of 1971. Well, if you thought the saga was over, it was not over yet. In 1973, a New York Supreme Court ruled that her murder conviction must be overturned, as Eddie Jr.'s cause of death was never confirmed as a criminal act, or anything at all for that matter. Further, the court found her boyfriend's testimony to be grossly prejudicial, as we're seeing traveling down where that lot was, where Missy was found. Around this time, one of the prosecuting attorneys reported to Gross that even he was unsure of Crimmins' guilt. "I don't know if she did it. It seems unlikely," he said. "I can't believe it. I don't believe the story I told the jury. I don't believe it now." However, in 1975, the New York State Court of Appeals reinstated the manslaughter verdict. The court argued that because the jury in each trial had found her criminally responsible for the death of her daughter, it was unlikely that they would have acquitted her if the trial-related errors had been made. Wow. So where is Alice Crimmins now? Very good question. Alice Crimmins spent a total of 30 months behind bars in Harlem's Parkside Correctional Facility between 1971, when she was first convicted, and 1977, when she was paroled. She had made a bid for parole twice before the board granted it, after seeing that she had entered a work release program as a secretary. I theorize right here, when you look at these apartments, these could have been very easily where the lot was located. All fairly new buildings. Right down this area here, down the right-hand side, this is where it could have been. Other than that, it was not clear what suddenly swayed the parole board to grant her release. During her time in prison, she married her longtime lover. The two remained married until his death in 1998. Alice Crimmins has remained remarkably elusive ever since. Some claim to have seen her in Florida living under a different name. Others reported sightings of her in New York, though none of these have ever been confirmed. Meanwhile, her literal trials and tribulations have inspired countless novels, documentaries, and movies. Her story became the basis for Mary Higgins Clark's 1971 best-selling mystery novel, Where Are the Children? And in the real life story, Allison's guilt could never be conclusively proven with hard evidence. Even today, the truth behind her children's murders remains unknown. So, as we see here, her Missy would have been found in one of these areas here along the right-hand side, all relatively new houses. Couldn't find the exact address. But this was a case that had rocked New York City many, many years ago. It was compared to the Casey Anthony trial. I hope all is well. Look forward to speaking to you guys very, very soon.